Evelyn Maeve, at 67 years young, had meticulously cultivated a life of profound, almost reverent, solitude. Her small, yet impeccably maintained log cabin, a sturdy fortress against the whims of the wild, was nestled so deeply within the whispering pine forests of the lower Sierra Nevada foothills that it felt less like a dwelling and more like a natural extension of the landscape itself. Sunlight, dappled and fragmented, filtered through the towering ponderosas and Jeffrey pines, painting shifting patterns on her cedar roof and the weathered planks of her porch. Here, the very air tasted of pine resin and damp earth, a constant, soothing balm to a soul that had endured its share of storms. A retired botanist of considerable renown, her days unfolded with a quiet, predictable rhythm, a graceful dance synchronized with the natural world around her. Mornings began with the precise ritual of brewing a pot of potent herbal tea, its steam rising in fragrant tendrils to meet the first, hesitant rays of dawn as they crept over the distant peaks. She'd sit on her wide, sturdy porch, Finn, her loyal, now somewhat arthritic, border collie, curled in a sunbeam at her feet, and watch the mist unravel from the valley floor, revealing the intricate tapestry of forest below. Afternoons were devoted to the meticulous tending of her vast, wildflower-filled garden, a vibrant, sprawling testament to her lifelong passion, or to the painstaking task of cataloging local plant species, her nimble fingers turning the delicate pages of ancient, leather-bound field guides. Evenings found her ensconced by the crackling warmth of her stone fireplace, the rich scent of burning pine logs filling the cozy cabin, as she delved into forgotten texts or simply listened to the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock, a relic from a life now past. The profound silence of the forest was her preferred companion, a vast, unbroken symphony broken only by the natural sounds that composed its timeless melody, the gentle rustle of dry leaves underfoot, the distant, piercing cry of a hawk circling high above, the soft, satisfying thud of pine cones detaching from ancient branches and landing on her cedar roof, or the occasional, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind weaving secrets through the needled boughs. She had lost her beloved husband, Arthur, to a sudden, merciless illness 5 years prior, a grief that had, with time, softened into a dull ache rather than a sharp torment. Yet, it had left behind an echoing void, a profound, unfillable space in the corners of her home and, more significantly, in the quiet chambers of her heart. She had, with characteristic fortitude, embraced her new independence, finding a fragile peace in the self-sufficiency of her isolated existence. But sometimes, especially in the long, velvet dark evenings, the pervasive silence felt less like solace and more like a cold, aching emptiness, a stark reminder of the laughter and shared whispers that once filled her small world. Evelyn was a woman of precise habits, a lover of meticulous order, and a firm, unwavering believer in the delicate, often brutal, natural balance of the wilderness, a balance that, she knew implicitly, rarely tolerated, much less benefited from, human intervention. She understood the intricate web of predator and prey, the cycle of life and death, as an immutable law. Her encounters with other people were rare and fleeting, preferring the enduring company of the ancient trees and the wild creatures that occasionally graced her property, a curious deer at dusk, a plump marmot sunning itself on a rock, the fleeting shadow of a bobcat. It was a late spring morning, unusually warm for the season, promising an early, rapid melt of the higher snows, that the first, utterly charming disruption to her meticulously ordered life occurred. Evelyn was meticulously pruning her prized heirloom rose bushes, their thorny branches heavy with nascent buds, a task that required both precision and patience. Finn, ever vigilant but now content in his golden years, dozed peacefully nearby, his grizzled snout resting on his paws. from the dense, emerald-green undergrowth at the very edge of her property, where the cultivated garden yielded to the wild forest, a series of profoundly strange and utterly captivating sounds drifted. It wasn't the familiar, frantic chitter of a squirrel, nor the melancholic, comforting hoot of an owl. It was a sequence of high-pitched, insistent whimpers, interspersed with what sounded suspiciously like frustrated huffs and tiny, remarkably indignant grunts. Her heart gave a sudden, unfamiliar lurch. It was the unmistakable sound of a bear cub. And it was impossibly close. Evelyn, a seasoned naturalist whose understanding of wildlife was honed by decades of direct observation, knew immediately what a lone cub meant, a cub in dire, almost certainly fatal, trouble. Mother bears were legendary for their ferocious, unyielding protectiveness. A cub separated from its sow was almost certainly orphaned, abandoned, or irrevocably lost. Her mind, trained in the unyielding logic of ecological systems, registered a familiar pang of concern, a professional regret for the inevitable. Yet, her scientific discipline cautioned against any form of direct intervention. Nature, she reminded herself, was often unsentimental, sometimes brutally cruel, but it had its own inscrutable ways of balancing its scales. She called Finn to her side, her voice low and firm, keeping him close, his ears pricked, and watched the dense green wall of the forest, her binoculars raised, her breath held. The sounds persisted, growing louder, more desperate, and increasingly expressive. Then, with a sudden, comical flurry of movement, a small, dark bundle of fur tumbled head over heels out of the thicket, tripping over its own clumsy, oversized paws, landing with a soft, undignified thud on the very edge of her manicured lawn. It was, beyond any doubt, a grizzly cub. Impossibly small, no bigger than a large house cat, its scruffy, mud-matted fur clung to its tiny frame, revealing the subtle outline of its ribs. Its eyes, wide and luminous emerald green, blinked up at her from its prone position with a mixture of raw fear and something else entirely, a profound, almost human, and utterly comical indignation. It pushed itself up, wobbled on unsteady legs, looked directly at her, let out a loud, demanding mrof. A sound Evelyn had never, in all her years studying ursine vocalizations, heard from a bear cub before. Then promptly sat down, a tiny, defiant sentinel, and began to whimper, not with terror, but with what sounded suspiciously like a series of exasperated complaints. Evelyn stared, utterly dumbfounded, her pruning shears forgotten in her hand. This wasn't just a lost cub, this was an aggressively, persistently vocal cub. It continued its dramatic monologue, a high-pitched, almost operatic chorus of whimpers, punctuated by sharp, huffy chuffs, and what sounded uncannily like exasperated sighs, as if narrating its entire tragic journey to her in excruciating, indignant detail. Finn, usually a model of wary discipline around wild animals, simply tilted his head, his ears swiveling, a curious, questioning whine escaping his throat, as if asking Evelyn for a translation. The cub seemed to be telling her a very long, very complicated story of its numerous misfortunes, its struggles, and its unwavering opinion on the general unfairness of its situation. She watched for hours, a silent vigil maintained from her porch, scanning the tree line with her binoculars, listening intently for any hopeful sign of a mother bear, a distant rustle, a familiar grunt, a fleeting shadow. Nothing. The forest remained vast and silent, offering no answers, no reprieve. The cub, meanwhile, continued its dramatic, one-sided conversation, occasionally attempting to bat at a passing butterfly with clumsy, uncoordinated paws, only to lose its balance, tumble over, and then right itself with a dramatic oof, followed by a shake of its head and a defiant "Hmph." As if the butterfly had personally and intentionally offended it with its fleeting grace. It was clearly starving, its small body trembling, but its spirit, and its undeniably persistent voice, seemed remarkably, miraculously intact. As the late afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long, purple shadows across the forest floor, the cub's whimpers grew weaker, softer, tinged now with genuine exhaustion and growing despair. Yet, its talking had not ceased. It had, with determined effort, managed to drag its small body closer to her porch, now sitting directly at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her with those wide, luminous emerald eyes, letting out a series of soft, mournful marrow grunts that pulled at something deep, long dormant within Evelyn's heart. Her carefully constructed scientific detachment, her disciplined adherence to the cold logic of nature, crumbled. This wasn't just a wild animal in its natural habitat, this was a desperate, tiny life, actively, eloquently pleading for help. And it was so utterly, charmingly, impossibly goofy in its vocal, indignant despair that a reluctant smile, a genuine, unforced curve of her lips, touched Evelyn's face. She knew the established rules, the stern warnings from park rangers: do not feed, do not approach, immediately call wildlife services. But her antiquated phone line, old and perpetually unreliable, was stubbornly dead, a recent, unseen lightning strike or a fallen branch likely severing the connection miles down the line. The nearest ranger station was a grueling day's hike away, an impossible journey with a fragile cub on the verge of collapse. This cub, she knew with a chilling certainty, wouldn't last the night. The thought, cold and stark, pierced through her scientific rationale. "All right, little one," she murmured, her voice rough with a mixture of exasperation and burgeoning affection. "You certainly know how to make a point." With the slow, deliberate care of a seasoned naturalist approaching a delicate specimen, she placed a shallow bowl of fresh, cool water and a small handful of plump, wild berries she had gathered earlier that morning from a patch far from the cabin, carefully setting them a few feet from the porch steps. The cub, after a moment of suspicious, almost theatrical, silence, cautiously approached, sniffed the offerings with a tiny, discerning nose, then devoured the berries with a ravenous hunger that spoke of days without sustenance. It paused only to let out a deeply satisfied, rumbling Hmph before burying its face in the water, lapping noisily. Over the next few days, the cub became a permanent, and incredibly vocal, fixture in Evelyn's otherwise solitary life. She named her Chatterbox, a playful moniker that perfectly encapsulated the cub's incessant, expressive vocalizations. Chatty, for short, never, truly never, stopped talking. Every action, every fleeting emotion, every new discovery was accompanied by a distinct, often comical, sound. A happy, rumbling chuff-chuff when Evelyn appeared on the porch. An indignant "Hmph" when Finn accidentally nudged her during a shared nap. A curious, questioning "row" whenever she encountered something new or puzzling, a shiny pebble, a rustling leaf, a particularly perplexing shadow. A deep, resonant, vibrating purr that emanated from her tiny chest when she was utterly content, curled in a sunbeam or nestled in a soft blanket. She was a furry, four-legged commentator on the world, a constant, endearing narrator of her own adventures, and her clumsy, often chaotic, antics were endlessly, helplessly amusing. Evelyn, with her deep, ingrained knowledge of bear behavior, knew the inherent dangers. She knew that habituating a wild animal to human presence was a grave disservice, potentially signing its death warrant in the wild. This was a temporary measure, a desperate, last-resort rescue. She kept a cautious distance, limiting physical contact to fleeting, necessary moments of medical assessment. She finally managed to contact the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center via an old, temperamental ham radio she kept for extreme emergencies, a crackling, unreliable link to the outside world. Dr. Lena Hansen, a stern but ultimately kind and pragmatic biologist from the center, listened to Evelyn's detailed, almost affectionate description of the cub's peculiar vocalizations with a mixture of professional skepticism and burgeoning intrigue. "You weren't exaggerating, Evelyn," Lena conceded, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips during a subsequent call. "Her sound samples are unique. We'll need to observe her closely. And no direct contact if possible. But her vocalizations, that's highly unusual. We'll send a team when the road's clear from that major rockslide down in the canyon." While waiting for the elusive wildlife team to navigate the treacherous, storm-damaged roads, Evelyn continued her careful, indirect care. She meticulously selected and prepared high-protein kibble, mixed it with wild berries she'd foraged and precious fish oil, and left her offerings in designated spots far from the porch, always ensuring Chatty was not directly associating the food with Evelyn's immediate presence. She wanted Chatty to understand that the food appeared as if by magic, a gift from the wilderness itself. But Chatty, with her uncanny intelligence and surprisingly keen observational skills, seemed to understand the true nature of their unspoken exchange. She would often leave Evelyn small, precious gifts in return, arranged with surprising neatness, a perfectly round, smooth river stone on her porch, still damp from the creek, a single, shiny pinecone placed precisely beside her garden trowel, or once, a curiously half-eaten, surprisingly large mushroom left with a proud chuff, as if presenting a prized, albeit slightly nibbled, trophy. The cabin, once a haven of quiet refuge, now hummed with a new, vibrant energy. Finn, initially wary and slightly bewildered by the tiny, demanding creature, had become Chatty's reluctant, yet endlessly patient, playmate. They would engage in comical, sprawling wrestling matches on the lawn, Finn gently pinning the cub with his large paws, while Chatty would respond with furious, playful growls and indignant Hmph, before wriggling free and pouncing back with renewed vigor. Evelyn found herself talking to Chatty constantly, explaining her botanical work as she tended to her plants, narrating her hikes as she explored the trails, sharing long-forgotten stories of Arthur, her voice finding new inflections, new warmth. The cub's constant, expressive responses, her predictable yet always amusing antics, made Evelyn feel less alone, less burdened by the oppressive silence of her grief. Her heart, which had felt so tightly closed and guarded since Arthur's passing, began to slowly, irrevocably open, warmed by the cub's boundless, goofy charm and her unwavering, vocal presence. Eleanor's scientific journals, once filled solely with meticulous botanical drawings of leaves, stems, and flower structures, now featured delightful, often humorous, sketches of Chatty's daily antics, Chatty attempting, with great determination, to climb a towering pine tree, only to slide down its rough bark with a dramatic whoosh, and a disgruntled Hmph, Chatty helping her in the garden by diligently digging up a perfectly healthy, established plant, then looking up with wide, innocent eyes and a questioning row, as if asking for approval, Chatty talking to a perpetually confused squirrel, a long, rambling monologue of chuffs and grunts that sent the tiny rodent chittering in bewildered retreat up a tree. These drawings, infused with unexpected humor and a deep, burgeoning affection, were a stark, vivid contrast to the precise, detached scientific observations she usually made, reflecting a profound shift within her own spirit. The day the wildlife team finally managed to navigate the cleared mountain roads and arrived at Evelyn's cabin was a day of profound, bittersweet emotion. Dr. Hansen, a stern but ultimately kind and perceptive woman, spent an hour observing Chatty from a safe distance, utterly captivated by her unusual vocalizations and relentlessly playful personality. "You weren't exaggerating, Evelyn," Lena said, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips as Chatty performed a particularly clumsy pounce on a startled Finn. "She's quite the character. And remarkably healthy, considering." The team then efficiently set up a humane trap, baited with the irresistible allure of honey and fresh berries. Evelyn watched, her heart aching with a familiar pang of loss, as Chatty, lured by the sweet scent, ambled into the trap, letting out a surprised, slightly indignant "Hmph" as the door clanged shut, echoing through the quiet forest. As Dr. Hansen efficiently prepared the cub for transport back to the rehabilitation center, Chatty, now secured but still vocal, turned her head, her luminous emerald eyes meeting Evelyn's from within the cage. She let out a soft, mournful "mroger," a sound that seemed to hold a world of confusion, a question, and perhaps a tender farewell. Evelyn felt a familiar sting of tears prick her eyes, blurring the image of the cub she had grown to love. "You'll be safe, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, ignoring Dr. Hansen's cautionary glance. "You'll be wild again. And strong." The cabin felt empty, profoundly, unnervingly quiet, after the drone of the wildlife vehicle faded into the distance, carrying Chatty away. The silence, once a cherished comfort, now felt heavy, oppressive, filled with the echoes of unspoken grief. Finn wandered restlessly, sniffing at the spots on the lawn where Chatty used to tumble and play, letting out soft, confused whines. Evelyn found herself instinctively listening for the familiar chuffs and huffs, her heart aching with the profound absence of that tiny, vibrant presence. The laughter, which Chatty had so effortlessly coaxed from her, had gone out of her days. The silence of her grief, which Chatty had so effectively, so joyfully, banished, began its slow, insidious creep back into the quiet corners of her life. But then, she looked at her journal, open on her desk, at the whimsical, goofy sketches of Chatty's antics, each one a vivid reminder of laughter and pure, unadulterated joy. She picked up the small, smooth river stone Chatty had left on her desk, its coolness a tangible link to that brief, magical time. She remembered the warmth of the cub's soft fur, the surprising weight of its small head against her hand during a rare, unguarded moment of weakness, the boundless energy and pure, unadulterated joy it had brought into her otherwise solitary existence. Chatty had not just been a rescued animal, she had been a profound catalyst, a tiny, vocal force of nature that had, without conscious effort, broken through the formidable walls Evelyn had so meticulously built around her heart after Arthur's passing. A few months later, as winter's first chill began to paint the mountain peaks with white, Dr. Hansen called. "Chatty's thriving, Evelyn. She's gained significant weight, learning all the foraging behaviors, and yes, she still talks a blue streak, though mostly to herself now. We're planning her release next spring, with another orphaned cub we've rehabilitated deep in a remote part of the national park, far from any human contact. She's truly ready." Evelyn felt a surge of overwhelming relief, followed by a familiar, lingering pang of longing. "Will she remember?" she asked, almost to herself, the question a whisper of hope and longing. Lena paused, a compassionate silence on the line. "Animals remember kindness, Evelyn. In their own way." Spring arrived, vibrant and riotous, bursting forth with new life and the boundless promise of renewal. Evelyn, now more connected to the rhythms of the wilderness than ever before, often hiked with Finn to a high, secluded ridge overlooking the vast, emerald expanse of the national park. It was a place where they could see without being seen, miles from the designated release site, a silent vigil maintained from a respectful distance. They never saw the actual release, an event conducted with utmost discretion by the park service, but they imagined it with vivid clarity, Chatty, robust and strong, her coat gleaming in the spring sun, bounding into the wild, perhaps letting out a final, triumphant Hmph as she embraced her freedom, her true home, her wild destiny. In the years that gently folded into one another, Evelyn Maeve continued her quiet life in the cabin, but it was no longer a life defined by solitude. It was a life profoundly infused with the vibrant memory of a talkative bear cub, a life inextricably connected to the vibrant, pulsing heart of the wilderness in a way she had never fully experienced before. Her garden flourished, a testament to renewed life. Her journals, once filled with the detached observations of a scientist, now contained lyrical prose and delightful sketches, each one a testament to the profound lessons she had learned from a tiny, vocal grizzly. She still hiked with Finn, but now she listened more intently, not just for the familiar sounds of the forest, but for the elusive, cherished echoes of a certain chuff or an indignant Hmph. And sometimes, when she was out on a remote trail, far from her cabin, her mind quiet and open to the wilderness, she would find a small, perfectly round pinecone placed neatly on a mossy rock, or a single, unusually large and sweet huckleberry left on a fallen log, its vibrant color a stark contrast against the rough bark. She never saw the giver. The forest remained vast and seemingly empty. But she would smile, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners, and let out a soft, knowing Hmph into the silent, ancient trees. Her heart, once quieted by the profound weight of grief, now hummed with the vibrant, enduring melody of an unexpected friendship, a profound, almost mystical connection to the wild, and the joyful, indelible memory of a rescue bear cub who never, truly never, stopped talking. Her life, once defined by loss and the quiet endurance of sorrow, had been beautifully, irrevocably reborn through the goofy antics and the silent, profound wisdom of a tiny, vocal grizzly. She was no longer just Evelyn Maeve, the retired botanist, she was a guardian of a secret, a recipient of wild grace, her spirit forever intertwined with the untamed beauty of the Sierra Nevadas. She lived on, surrounded by the towering pines and the whisper of the wind, her heart full, knowing that in saving a life, she had truly, gloriously found her own.